Do you want to turn your Unity scenes from this to this? Well, stick around, because in this tutorial, I'll show you how to turn your boring, flat grass into eye-catching, dynamic, and well-optimized scenes. Also, keep in mind, throughout this tutorial, this is my first time doing one of these, and I make a few minor coding errors. This shouldn't be a problem if you have any experience in Unity, but I wouldn't recommend this tutorial if it's your first time using Unity. Also, there's going to be some Blender modeling in this tutorial. If you don't want to use or install Blender, then I'll have the completed model down below in the description, but I would recommend using Blender anyway. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, so, first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you're using a recent version of Unity. For some reason, it doesn't work on the 2020 version of Unity. You can't GPU instance objects on an older version of Unity, so you're going to want to be using a recent version of Unity. Without further ado, let's just get into it. Alright, so we're in a new Unity project. First thing we're going to want to do is install Universal Render Pipeline, because we don't have that installed yet. So, this is a pretty easy process. All we're going to do is go up to Window, Package Manager, select from a Unity registry, and once you have all your packages loaded up, you're just going to scroll down to, here it is, Universal RP, and click Install. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is go create rendering URP asset with Universal Renderer, and you can just call it whatever you want. I'll just call it Render Pipeline. This really doesn't matter what you call it. Should create 2 assets. And now we're almost done. All you're going to do is just go up to Edit, Project Settings, and there should be, in the Graphics tab, there should be something called a Scriptable Render Pipeline Settings. Should just be a slot here, which you can drag and drop your render pipeline into. And there we go. Now we are actually using the Universal Render Pipeline, which is great. That's the first step of this completed. The first thing we're going to want to do, now that we've got our project properly set up, is we're going to want to create a new game object, and we'll just call it Chunk. So, this is what's actually going to spawn in our terrain. To this chunk, we're going to add a mesh renderer and a mesh filter, and we'll also add a new script, call it mesh generator. So, we're in our new script, and we're just going to declare some variables first up. And that's it for now, I think. That's it. So, in the start function, we're going to create a new mesh, set our mesh filter component to that new mesh, and then we're going to call a function called create mesh. Then we'll actually create that function. So, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set our vertices array to equal a new vector3 array, and in that array, the array size is going to be the x size plus 1 multiplied by the z size plus 1. Create 2 for loops, one inside of the other, just like I've done. What this is going to do is it's going to loop through every single vertice in our array. Using this, we can assign height data to each vertice individually. For this tutorial, we're going to use Perlin noise. So, float y equals mathf.Perlin noise. So we're going to get the coordinate of the vertice that we're looking at by doing that, and then timesing it by 0.04. So now we have Perlin noise based on the vertice that we're looking at. So now we actually have to assign it to the vertices. So we'll go vertices I equals new vector3 x y z, and let's times this y by 10, and then we're going to go I++. Now that we've assigned vertices to our mesh, we're going to use these vertices to create triangles for our mesh. So we'll set our triangle array, and then what we'll do is we'll create 2 for loops, one inside of the other, just like how we've done before. In fact, it's so similar that you can just copy and paste the code from before. Just delete the I variable and delete the inside of the second for loop. And inside this, we're basically going to draw out our triangles. The code here is really repetitive, so just copy down what I have on screen. After you've written the code, increase the vert variable by 1 and the tries variable by 6. Then in the parent for loop, also increase the vert variable by 1. Our mesh almost has all the data that it needs to function, but it's still missing UVs. We can assign UVs in a very similar way to how we've assigned vertices and triangles. First, we set our UV array's length. Then we make 2 for loops, one inside of the other, just like the last 2 times, and we write our code inside. This will loop through every single UV and give it the correct values. That's all the code we need to generate our mesh. Problem is, we haven't actually assigned all these arrays to our mesh, so we're going to create a new function up here called update mesh, which is essentially just going to update the mesh with all the data that we've just created. So we're going to go create mesh, update mesh. Now scroll down here, actually create the function. First thing we're going to do is just type mesh.clear To actually assign our generated mesh data to our mesh, all we have to do is type 3 lines, which are basically the same thing, and then recalculate normals with this line. If I've got everything right, this should work. Okay, of course there's a bunch of errors. What have I forgot? I forgot a equals sign. Don't be an idiot. Don't forget equal signs, they're important. What have I forgotten? Apparently I've forgotten a lot of stuff. Semicolon there, okay. That's not supposed to be a comma. Okay guys, I'm sorry, I've made a bunch of typos. But when I hit play, a mesh should generate. Let's hope for the best, come on. Okay, that ain't look right. I think I've messed up a bracket somewhere. Oh, okay. Guys, I'm really sorry, I put a bracket in the wrong spot. Okay, yeah, I made a lot of mistakes. Okay, this is the final code that works. So now everything should work, so let's just press play. And yeah, so we get a plane, but there's no material attached to it, so really simple fix. Create material, we'll just call it ground. And just drag it on. There we go. Yeah, that looks perfect. Cool. That's our terrain. We've got that all out of the way. Next thing we're going to want to do is start spawning in some grass. Under our chunk object, we're just going to create a new empty object. Call it grass spawner. And on this, we're going to create a new script. Also called grass spawner. We'll drag it on. Don't know why I put 2 there, that's weird. There we go. Okay, so now that we have our grass spawner script on it, and make sure it's all set to 000, all this stuff. Except for scale, make sure that's set. So now we can go into our script and start editing it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is just declare some variables at the start of a script. Just copy down the variables that I've typed out. Under our start function, we're going to essentially create a huge array. So the first thing we're going to do is create 2 variables which determine how large our grass area is going to be, which is the same size as a chunk. Then what we're going to do is create 2 for loops, one inside of the other, which will loop through everywhere we want grass to be, and create position, rotation, and scale data for that grass. So just copy down what I have written. Oh, and by the way, there's one variable that I forgot to define at the start, the matrix 4x4 array called matrices. Just make sure you include that with all the other variables at the start. Now all we need to do is, in the update function, we just need to call another function called graphics.drawMeshInstanced, which will draw all our grass objects that we've defined in the matrix 4x4 earlier. So, I forgot to do the mat clone stuff, so it's really easy, it's just one line. We just type mat clone equals new material mat, and what this does is it creates a clone of our current material, which allows different grasses to have different material properties, essentially, which is important. Okay, one typo. And of course, remember to put semicolons where they're needed. So now we have this. We need to assign some variables. So for the mesh, just assign a cube to it for now. And for the material, create a temporary material. This isn't going to be there forever. And we'll just call it grass. We are going to create a new material later on, so this is temporary. Don't bother assigning anything to it just yet. And if we run this, we should get some grass that spawned in. Whoopsies, I forgot to assign some stuff. Oh, of course. Guys, I forgot to actually set the size of the matrices array. Sorry, guys. So all we have to do is just type matrices equals new matrix 4x4 x size times by x size times by the z size. There we go. So now we should get something. Bruh. Oh yeah, of course. So if we get this area down here, it just means that you have to go on the material and enable GPU instancing on it. This basically allows it to be GPU instance. There we go, guys. So you see all these cubes down here? You can't click on them because they're not actually game objects, but they're still being rendered because they're on the GPU side. To spawn it on the plane, we're going to have to do a little bit of work. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to generate a height map from our mesh. So we're going to make a texture called public texture 2D height map. When you create your mesh, you're going to also set a height map to be a new texture 2D and just set it to X size and then Z size. So it's going to be the same size as our mesh, basically. And then what we're going to want to do is actually assign pixels to this height map. So we have a blank texture right now. We're going to want to actually assign pixels to it, which is really easy. We're basically just going to copy this. So copy the vertices stuff. Keep this in here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this, keep the Perlin noise stuff, we need to delete these equal signs here so that our code covers the whole height map. And then all we're going to do is we're going to delete, instead of assigning our y value to a vertex, we're going to assign it to a height map. So we go height map dot set pixel x z on the height, those of the height map coordinates. Then we're going to go new color y y y. There we go. All we're going to do after we've basically assigned all the pixels to our height map is we're just going to go height map dot apply to lock it in. There we go. What have I done wrong? Forgot a semicolon, of course. Now we should have a height map being generated with our chunk. So under our script we have this texture 2D here, which not sure how well you can see that, but it is generating a height map of essentially what the terrain looks like. Now that we have our height map, we have to somehow transfer this over to our grass spawner. Now, the easiest way to do this is, instead of just having our grass spawner spawn the grass on the start, the first thing we're going to do is reference our grass spawner in this object. So we're going to go public game object grass spawner. And then what we're going to do is, under our chunk, we are just going to drag in our grass spawner object. So now that it's being referenced, what we can do is turn this into an actual function. So instead of it just being spawned in the start, actually all we have to do is just change the name of this. We're just going to call it generate grass. And then in this function, in the parameters, we're going to have it pass through a texture 2D called the height map, which is the same height map that we've been generating here. So now I think you can see where this is going. We have our height map. So what we're going to do is we're going to go, oh, and this has to be public, of course. Make sure it's a public void or else you won't be able to reference it. So down in the update mesh function, we have our height map. So what we're going to do is we're just going to type this line in here, which says grass generator.getComponent grass spawner.generate grass height map. And what this does is it triggers a function on our grass spawner script, which will generate the grass with the height map that we've passed in from our chunk. So our grass will know what height to spawn at. If we want to use this height map to spawn our grass at the correct height on the terrain, it's really simple. All we have to do is basically just get the height map, get the grass position on the height map. So we'll go float y equals height map dot get pixel x z dot grayscale. And we're also going to times it by 10 because if you remember, we times our original terrain by 10. We also have to times this by 10. Now, apparently there's an error. It's because I called it the wrong damn name. So this is called grass spawner, not grass generator in my script. So, my bad guys. In update mesh, make sure it's grass spawner, not grass generator. Alright, so now when we run this, our grass should be aligned properly with our mesh. Sweet, it is. So as you can see, our grass, or our cubes, which will be grass in the future, are actually aligned with our mesh. And we can move the mesh around and the grass doesn't follow it because the grass isn't actually tied to it. It's only on the GPU. So now, our grass is actually spawning on top of the terrain, which is great. It doesn't look like grass, but we can fix that very easily. So yeah, that's very good. Alright, so now we have our grass, but it looks pretty awful. I wouldn't really call it grass right now, it's just a bunch of cubes. Let's make it actually look like grass. First thing we're going to do is make a model so that instead of it just being cubes, it's 3 planes combined together. So open up Blender and delete all this stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to add a plane in, click R, Y, 90 to rotate it up. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is we're going to hit edit mode, select all of it by pressing A, and then just hit U, and then unwrap. Now, in the top left corner here, just click up here and drag across to open up a new window. Switch this to UV editor, and here we have our UVs. Okay, so now that we have our UV projected, select all of the UVs, hit R, and then just hit 90. So after that, what you're going to do is you're just going to hit duplicate this plane 2 more times. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go Command C, Command V, R, Z, 60. Do that one more time. Command C, Command Z, R, Z, 60. There we go. That's our plane. So then we just hit select all, hit join, and then we can export it. Great. Now that we have our grass, just find it and drag it into your project. We have our prefab. Now what we're going to do is simply go into our grass spawner object and it gives us a mesh. All we're going to do is just replace it. Now, you can't see it, but don't be fooled. They are there. They're just very tiny. Now, to fix this, we're going to have to do some changes in our script that actually spawns these grass objects in. So what we're going to do is, in the grass object spawner, instead of scaling it to 111, we're just going to scale it up to 100. There we go. So now it's going to be a lot bigger. So we can actually see our object now. That's actually a little too big. I didn't realize that was how big it was going to be. For now, I'll just set it to 50. Okay, it's pretty obvious where it is. Weird thing is you can't see it from certain angles. That's just because of the way the material is rendering. What we're going to do is we're going to delete the current material that we have. This one, it's not actually what we want to use. So what we're going to do is, instead of creating material, we're going to create a shader by going to create shader graph URP lit shader graph, and we'll just call it grass. So there's our grass. Now what we're going to do is create a material off that grass. To make a material based off our shader, you have to right click on the shader and then select create material. Great, so now we have a material that's linked to the actual shader graph. First thing we're going to do is we're going to select the render face and select both. So now you should be able to see it lit from, what the hell? Oh yeah, right. Of course, I got an error. That's because it needs to be enabled GPU instancing. There we go. Now it should work. Always remember to do that. There we go. So now, as you can see, we can see it from all angles. There's none of that weird shading issues because I fixed it. You are probably noticing it's on a little bit of a weird angle. That's easy to fix. We can just do that in our script here. Instead of rotating it like this, all we have to do is rotate it on a 270-degree angle, and that way it'll be flipped the right way up, I think. If it's not, my bad. Yeah, okay, there we go. So now this is actually starting to look like grass. Well, of course, it's still not textured, but we're getting somewhere, I would say. To give this an actual texture, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our grass object, and what we're going to do is we're going to add our new object, call it a texture 2D, just call it grass, drag her in, and from this we're going to create a sample texture 2D. Now, with this sample texture 2D, we're going to plug it into our base color, and we're also going to plug it into the alpha. If there isn't any alpha here, which there isn't for me, this is quite simple to fix. You just need to click space and then type alpha. Click space while you're on selected, and then just click alpha. If it's grayed out like this, that's not an issue. The problem is that we don't have alpha clipping turned on, so just hit the alpha clipping button. And while we're in here, I highly recommend turning shadows off, because this is a grass. We don't really want the grass casting shadows on itself. It's just going to look weird, so I'd highly recommend turning that off. Now if we run it, there's still nothing there, but the material is very obviously applied to it, which is good. If we want to actually have an image here, what we're going to want to do is put an image here. We need a grass image, basically. I will have a link in the description to the one I'm going to use. I am going to use this one that I've just dragged in from my downloads folder. So if you go into the editor and you have your material here, just drag your grass texture up into the grass slot that we've created. So now we have our grass texture applied. One issue I've noticed is that it's like mostly buried underground, so to fix that, just spawn it slightly above where it's spawning right now. So all we have to do is, in the position, which is where it's going to be spawned, just add +1. If that's too much, you can decrease it later. It's not really an issue. We'll just try it as +1, see how that looks. That's a little too high, so we'll do 0.5F. Yeah, that looks about right. Yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. So now we have our grass, but it doesn't look great right now. I mean, it looks a little bit dead, you know, fake almost. It's not moving at all. Okay, so first thing to make this grass look a little more interesting and lively is we're going to fix the fact that it literally just is completely, they're all completely in line with each other. They look like they've been planted perfectly. So the way we're going to fix this is by adding a little bit of randomness to the way they're positioned, going into the script that spawns them, and instead of spawning them at the exact same rotation, what we'll do is we'll add a random dot range 20 to -20. So this will just add a little bit of randomness to how it's tilted. It might look a little bit like it's facing forward or backward, and we'll also add another random dot range. So we'll make this one 0 to 360 because this one's controlling the Y rotations. Okay, now that we've had that, now that we've implemented that, let's see how it looks. Okay, it's looking a little bit better. I mean, it still looks a little bit weird, but we'll get to that later. It looks better than it did before. Alright, so what I'm going to add next is I'm going to make the grass move around a little bit, because it's pretty much completely stationary right now. Well, no, it is completely stationary right now. So to change this up, I'm going to add more to this grass shader that we have here to make it move a little bit. Okay, so first thing you're going to want to do is create a time node. And then what we're going to do is drag this time node into a multiply. And then what we're going to do is multiply it by a vector 3. No, a vector 2, I mean, sorry. And we're going to set this vector 2, we're going to set the x on it to 2, to 1, and the y on it to 0, right? Now we're going to create a position node, and we're going to drag this into a tiling and offset node, and we're going to drag this into the offset. So we should have something that looks like this now. Now what we're going to do is drag this into a gradient noise node. We'll set the scale to 2. Now you can change these parameters after, you can play around with these, but for now we just set it to 2, alright? And looks like I've run out of space, so we'll just drag this whole thing back. Okay, we're already like halfway there, guys, so it's pretty easy. So, now that we have our gradient noise, we'll just subtract 0.5 off it. So now we have this, and then we're going to multiply it by another node. We're going to multiply it by 0.3. Now what we're going to do is we have this, we're going to add something onto it again. And what this is going to be, is it's going to be a position node. Make sure it's set to world space, and we're going to split it. So we're going to split the R value, so we're going to drag the R value of the split node into this add node. What we're going to do now is we're going to drag this into a combine node. Make sure it's linked up to the R on this combine node, and then from the split, we're going to drag the green from the split into the green, drag the blue from the split into the blue, leave the alpha as 0, and now we're almost done. What we're going to do is we're going to drag this position, drag this combine out into a lerp node. Make sure it's set as B, so make sure the combine node is dragged into a B point of a lerp node. Then we're going to create another position node. Make sure it's set to world. Drag this into the lerp node. And then the last thing is just going to be a UV channel. Go split. And then drag the green of this UV into here. This is what you should be left with. Something that looks like this. Now the final thing we have to do is we drag this into a transform node. We set it to transform from world to object, right? And drag this into the position. Bam! Already that looks way better. It still looks a little bit messed up because of the colors, but we're going to fix that later. For now, I'd say that looks, that's a pretty cool effect. It looks like it's waving in the wind. Okay, so as you can see, we have our grass, but there just isn't enough of it. And so it's pretty obvious that there's some gaps in between, so we're just going to add some more in, and this is pretty easy to do. First thing we're going to do is go to our mesh generator script, and what we're going to do is when we generate, we're going to create a new variable called grass density, and as default it's just going to be set to 1. And what we're going to do, we're going to take this grass density, and when we create a height map, what we want to do is we want to times the size of it by this grass density. Now what we're going to do is when we do our height map stuff, what we're going to do is instead of saying z size, we'll just say height map dot width and height map dot height. So now it's going to loop through every single pixel in our height map. And first thing we're going to want to do is just times transform.position.x by our grass density. Same with our transform.position.z. And then what we're going to do is after we've times it by 0.04, we're going to divide it by grass map density. Or grass density, Divide it by grass density. Same thing here. So there we go. Now our height map, we can change the resolution of it essentially by changing this. And that'll just change the resolution of it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to redo a bit of the code here. So first thing we're going to do is actually pass that grass density in with our generate grass function. We're going to just put a comma here and type grass density. There we go. So now when this function triggers, we're going to be also given an int, which we'll just call grass density. So now we have access to that grass density variable that we set in the other script. And what we're going to do with it is pretty easy. So first thing we're going to do is instead of setting our x size just to 20, what we're going to do is we're going to set it to our height map dot width and do the exact same with our z size, but set it to the height map dot height. So all we'll do is just divide our x by the grass density and also our z. Now when we go back into Unity, if I didn't forget anything, okay, that's surprising, no errors. If we run it now, we should just see should be the exact same because I haven't increased the density yet. It's still at 1. But if we go into this and set it to 2, okay, they're spawning twice as many, but they're spawning in the exact same location. So it is spawning double, they're just spawning at the wrong point. Okay. So x is an int. You can't divide an int and get a fraction. So, very important. Just in brackets, put float before the x, and that'll convert it into a float. Now, if we run it, we should get double as much grass, or actually 4 times 10. There we go. So that looks a lot better. So now we have a lot more grass. That is certainly a huge improvement. So yeah, looks good. Okay, so by now you probably noticed that the grass just looks a little bit off. Like the colors on it, some of them look really grayed out and some of them look bright and they don't really reflect the sun properly. It's just weird. So to fix this, what we're going to do is we're going to generate a normal map from our terrain and then apply it to the grass based on where the grass is positioned on the terrain. So to do this, we're going to first have to generate a normal map from our terrain. We're going to have to go into our script. First thing we're going to do is up here, we're going to make a new texture. Now, we're going to have to change our script a little bit. We're going to have to create some new parameters from these functions. Firstly, we're going to add a 1 right here. So we'll go int border size, x size plus equals border size times by 2. And we'll do the same for z size. Now, down here where we set the vertice position, just take away border size from the x and z position. And that's pretty much it for down here. So make sure at the end of the function, you resize the x size and the y and the z size properly so that it hasn't been changed at all. Now what we're going to do is in the start function, duplicate our create mesh and update mesh functions, and in the second create mesh function, set that 1 to a 0, and then put a true variable in our first update mesh and a false variable in our second update mesh. Down in the update mesh function, we're going to add a bit of code to make a normal map basically. So after this recalculate normals thing, oh yeah, and also we have to add a variable in here, so we're going to go bool send off normals if recalculate normals equals true. Now we're just going to set our normal map texture size to x size plus 2 and z size plus 2. Now just go up to the part of our script with the 2 for loops inside of each other for the vertices code. Copy and paste it down here, and where it says z size, just replace this with normal map.width, and where it says x size, replace it with normal map.height. Then just delete the code inside both of the for loops except for the I++. Now just type out this huge line of code which is going to set the pixel on our texture to the color of the normal. You might have to pause the video for this. And then after that, just set the filter mode of the normal map to filter mode.point and then just type normal map.apply. Now what we're going to do is copy and paste our function that tells the grass to generate, and we're going to paste it right underneath our normal map.apply line. Then we're just going to add our normal map texture to the function parameters. Guys, I also spelled a variable wrong. Sorry, this is supposed to be send off normals, not recalculate normals. My bad, guys. Now, we should be able to access it from here. So, back in our grass spawner script, we'll just add a comma and add a new parameter, which is going to be the normal map. There we go. Now what we're going to do is type these lines of code into our grass spawner script, which will essentially crop our normal map texture to get rid of unwanted normal data. So just pause the video and type all of this in. So now we have basically the data that we need for the normal map. It's all cropped, it's all processed properly. What we're going to do now is we are going to, so we have to create a few new parameters in our grass shader. These are going to be a texture 2D for our normal, and a vector 2 for our coordinates. Which is to actually get these to mean anything, just save your asset, then go back into your script, and what we're going to do is after we've gotten our new normal map that we want, and after we've cloned our material right here, you're just going to go mat clone dot set texture, and you want to set it to whatever is right here. As you can see, there's a reference for your variable. In my case, it'll be underscore normal, and if you named it the same thing as me, it will also be underscore normal, and then comma, and then just call it new normal map. So what we're going to do now is we're going to type matClone.setVector, and it should just be called the same as before, underscore chords. If you named it something else, it'll be underscore and then whatever else you named it, and you're just going to type new vector 2 this dot transform dot position dot x this dot transform dot position dot z. My keyboard is messed up. I can't do this for some reason. Guys, don't use these in your quotation marks. I don't know why, but my keyboard's messed up right now and I literally can't. Okay, there we go. Make sure to use the double quotation marks or whatever that character's called instead of a single ones. It doesn't work if you have single ones. Oh, and also remember your semicolons. I always forget. Now, this is gonna require a bit of the shader programming stuff from before. Essentially, now that we have access to that normal map, what we're gonna do is we're going to use it to determine what the normal of this grass should be. So to do this is quite complicated, but we're gonna take a position node. So we're gonna take it, split it, clamp it. We're also gonna take the blue out of this one, make sure it's the blue, clamp it again. We have to take the coords, split them. So we take this and we put this, we clamp it between this, and we also clamp it between this, but we go add, and then 19.9. And you can shrink this stuff down or else it just gets even worse than it should be. So now we have the first one done. Now we're gonna make a new one down here called chords 2, split, and instead of taking from the R, we're gonna take from the green. This is correlated to the Z coordinate of our chunk. Drag it into this, and then we're just gonna go G, add 20, drag it into here. So now we have to combine it back. So combine it, this one to the R and this one to the B. So now what we're going to do is divide this by 20, get a fraction of it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to split it again, and the R is going to feed into a vector 2. The blue is also going to feed into that vector 2. And then this, we're almost done, guys. This is going to feed into a sample texture 2D. This is basically, this vector 2 is going to tell the sample texture 2D essentially the coordinates of our grass on a scale between 0 and 1. Now, all we have to do now is just drag our normal texture in there. All we have to do now is transform this from world space to object space. When you transform it, you don't want it to be a position, you want it to be a normal. And then up here, this is a problem. In our fragment shader, the normal is set to tangent space, which is a problem. We want it to be set to object space. So all we have to do now is go into the graph inspector, scroll down, and when you see fragment normal space, change it from tangent to object. There we go. And now all we have to do is just drag this up here. The reason why it just still looks a little bit weird, so I recommend turning the smooth. You don't have to do this, but I recommend turning the smoothness down to 0. Okay, so now our grass actually has normals, so it doesn't look awful. Which is great, you know? That's great. We don't want the grass to look bad, so it's good that it has normals now. Perfect, so we're done with normals. We're almost done. Okay, so we have some grass, but we don't have much of it. If you want to make more, we're going to need to spawn in multiple chunks. Okay, we clearly have some issues here. So if we try making multiple chunks, the grass doesn't really respect the fact that the chunk's over here. It just spawns in at the default area. Yeah, and that's pretty obviously an issue. So we're going to try and fix that. All we have to do is go into our cube spawner, and when we spawn in grass, we basically just want to add on the chunks transformed dot position. So all we have to do is at the end of our position, type this dot transform dot position. So now if we go back into Unity, the grass should spawn. There we go. So now we have 2 chunks, but I don't really want to have to spawn every single chunk manually. So to get around this, what we're going to do is we're going to just delete the chunk that we spawned. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this a prefab so that we can instantiate it very quickly and easily. So drag it down, drag your chunk object down here. You can just delete the one in the hierarchy now. What we're going to do is we're going to make a new game object called chunk spawner. We're going to make a new script and we'll call it chunk spawner, just like the game object. Or you can call it whatever, really doesn't matter. We'll drag that onto our chunk spawner object, and for some reason it gave us 2, so we'll remove one. I don't know why it does that. Great, now we have our chunk spawner script. First thing we're going to do is make a public game object called chunk, and we're going to make a public int terrain size equal to 1. On the start method, we're going to want to spawn in all our chunks, so this is pretty easy. So what we're going to do on the start method is we're going to make 2 for loops, one inside of the other, and then we're going to type this instantiate line of code, which instantiates our chunk. Just pause the video so you can copy this down. So then underneath our new chunk instantiate line, we're going to type another line of code which just sets the new chunk's transform.parent to our chunk spawner game object.transform. So now that we have our chunk spawner, it doesn't actually have an object to spawn in. Really easy fix. Just go down to your prefab that you made earlier and drag it into the chunk. Now if we run this, we should get a single chunk because the terrain size is set to 1. Great, we got exactly what we expected, which is perfect. All you have to do now is just, if you want more, increase it. I increased it to 3, so we should get 9 chunks. Yeah, perfect. Works great. That's 3 chunks. Well, it's actually 9 chunks. It's 3 times 3. So yeah, now we can have multiple chunks, which is pretty cool. Just one last thing is the ground material is still a little bit boring. It's basically just white. So I just found a random image online that I'm going to use. Link in the description, but you can pick your own if you want. It's just a grass texture. I think it's nice. It'll work fine. All we're going to do is just drag our grass texture onto the base map of the ground, and voila, instantly looks way better. It is a little bit blurry though, so I'm just going to increase the tiling from 1 to like 10, maybe like 5. Honestly, 10's a little too much. Oh, that's good enough. Honestly, that's good. And there we go. We have grass. Look at that. We're done. That's literally it. That's the whole tutorial. We're done. Glad we could get this done so quickly. So yeah, really hope you learned something from this tutorial, and if you want to see more videos like this, want to see some more tutorials, more game dev videos in general, hit the subscribe button. You know, I'd really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So yeah, that's about it. See ya.